An old post from Lamar Jackson on social media has resurfaced after DK Metcalf requested out from the Seattle Seahawks. To talk about what it said and the Ravens free agency list lengthening with more players continuing to hit the open market. All that and more coming up next on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day as well. We're free and available for you on all podcasting platforms. That includes a video form on YouTube where you can like and subscribe to the channel, and as an audio form where you can follow along and subscribe as well. We're a 5-day-a-week plus more daily Ravens show. So Monday through Friday, we have you covered every single day of the week with Ravens content. Plus, on the weekends, we sometimes have bonus episodes when there are headlines. We go live after every single Ravens game, every piece of Ravens big news. So if you or a friend or a family member is looking for Ravens content, be sure to keep it locked in here on Locked On Ravens. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Ravens, just a couple days away from free agency, literally only a few, and there are plenty of storylines to talk about here as, in my opinion, Baltimore enters a very important offseason. They're already in it now, but this is a team that in 2025, I think, does have a ton of opportunities to win a Super Bowl. Now, how they approach free agency, how they approach the draft, any trades that happen this offseason, that will be a big determining factor to continue to support, I'll say, the roster that they already have. And in the first part of the show, an old tweet has resurfaced from Lamar Jackson from a couple of years ago recruiting DK Metcalf. And we'll talk about that. Kind of has the Lamar stamp of approval from back then. And I'm sure if you ask him now, he'd say the same thing. And we'll talk about what that means in the first part of the show and just the DK Metcalf conversation a little more. We talked about it yesterday as well. Then in the second part of the show, free agency, the wish list is always lengthening. And with the amount of players that have been cut, released, and hitting the open market, that list does continue to lengthen. And so we'll talk about a guy that we talked about yesterday and Gardner Minshew being an option for the Ravens, as well as some others for Baltimore that I think could make sense. And then finally, I'll talk about how Baltimore should approach this free agency, because I think there are a couple different ways that they can, but with the outlook of the team, especially not just for this season, but what it looks like after this year, depending on what happens, I think that Baltimore should approach free agency a certain way. So let's talk about, first of all, the Lamar Jackson tweet this coming. People picked it up. There was a fan who asked, how would you feel, Ravens flock, about bringing in DK Metcalf? Personally, I would love it. The more weapons for Lamar, the better. This was back April 3rd, 2022. And Lamar Jackson ended up quote tweeting this and ended up saying, DK Metcalf slide. We got them guys, but you can slide too. We welcome everyone here with open arms. You're definitely one of them guys as well. So this is just typical Lamar, by the way. And look, we talked about this with Lamar making it clear that he wanted Myles Garrett in Baltimore by retweeting a post of Myles Garrett in the Ravens uniform, right? Lamar, I guess, not very shy about those things. And I personally love that from Lamar. But when you talk about what a trade could look like for DK Metcalf, obviously yesterday we talked a bit about if Mark Andrews could be involved in that conversation. And if you haven't checked that out already, be sure to do so, because we have an in-depth conversation about whether Mark Andrews is worth moving off of for DK Metcalf. But to me, this is another, I guess, wrinkle in the entire conversation here when it comes to Lamar Jackson, because we know that these are two different teams, right? 2022, we're in 2025 right now. This tweet was almost 3 years ago. But Lamar Jackson, stamp of approval for DK Metcalf. And again, just because this is an old stamp of approval does not mean that that is something that he would not want. And Lamar, again, is somebody that he wants guys in that can help this team win. And in my opinion, DK certainly can do that. But we have to kind of look at this from an entire perspective, right? Because let's look, this being on April 3rd, 2022, this was after the 2021 season. Now, Lamar, he was polite about it, right? He said, oh, we have them guys, right? But you can slide anyway. You know, we welcome everyone here, and made sure to make DK know that he is one of those guys as well. But back in the Ravens, let's go back in history for Baltimore, 2021. Here was the state of Baltimore's wide receiver position. Marquise Brown had just finished his last year with the Ravens. Rashod Bateman finished up his rookie season with Baltimore. Sammy Watkins was a member of this group. Devin Duvernay, James Prochet, and Tylan Wallace, plus Miles Boykin. It's not necessarily anything to write home about here. Obviously, Zay Flowers was not on the team. That took a couple more years. And while Baltimore now, it's Marquise Brown is gone, Devin Duvernay is gone, James Prochet is gone, Miles Boykin is gone, and whatnot. The only two receivers remaining from that room are Rashod Bateman and Tylan Wallace. Those are the two. Now you add Zay Flowers into that equation, and obviously you have a wide receiver one, in my opinion. Rashod Bateman also has those wide receiver one capabilities, because Rashod Bateman back in 2021 is not the Rashod Bateman that we saw in 2024. But for a guy like DK Metcalf, Baltimore does have a need at wide receiver. We talked about this yesterday, because it really is just the Zay Flowers and Rashod Bateman show there. Now, does that mean that you have to go all in for a guy like DK Metcalf? And if that involves Mark Andrews or a high-level draft pick, whatever it is, no, it does not. There are multiple different free agents this offseason, whether it be guys who are just on the market or who have been cut and put onto the market. There are multiple different players that could fit that void without having to give up all that capital. Plus, if you were to trade for DK, you would have to make sure that he was going to be a big part of your future, because I don't think that moving off of Mark Andrews or a high-level draft pick for a rental, plus some of the money maneuvering that would have to happen, I don't think that is necessarily worth it. Plus, we know wide receiver with Zay and Rashod is not the biggest need on the team. Obviously, Ronnie Stanley, offensive line, we know that as well is a big need. And, with that whole situation, it's not just going to stop with Ronnie, right? Yeah, you have a lot of other things you have to address there in terms of Patrick McCary. What's that going to look like in that whole situation? Are they going to draft a guy or two? These things are so ever evolving that something I say on this show might not mean anything 30 minutes later when you're watching, because, well, something just changed, something just happened. So not only offensive line, but edge is a big need. We know that. Safety, corner, those are needs despite having stars the Ravens have as well. There are all different types of options here. But look, if you're telling me Lamar would not want to play with DK Metcalf and all that, man, I feel like Lamar would love it. Plus, we have this stamp of approval from back in 2022 where, look, he did approve of this. And he was someone that, again, had never had that star wide receiver to play with. In fact, in reality, when you're talking about like Zay Flowers and Rashod Bateman, those two guys are stars in the making, 1,000%. DK is an established star, right? He's an established guy. Not that Zay hasn't done establishing. Not that Rashod didn't establish himself last season. But DK is especially what the Ravens need, and this is something we hammered home yesterday on the show. He's 6'4", 230, go-getter. This is the exact type of guy you need. Plus, he has speed to him as well. And I think with the Ravens, they've tried to find that bigger-bodied speed threat. Miles Boykin didn't work out, but he was a big player that had speed. Tez Walker has speed, and while he's not 6'5" or anything, he still is a bigger guy that is not like this hulking guy, but at least in terms of length. The Ravens, if they brought in a guy like a Tyreek Hill or whatnot, like obviously star, right? Tyreek Hill is a star, but he is not the prototype. He is not the body type that the Ravens need. The Ravens do need a DK Metcalf type of player. Now, that doesn't mean they need DK Metcalf in the first place, but I'm sure Lamar would be more than willing to play with a guy like DeAndre Hopkins or maybe Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen. There are a lot of options, which is why I don't think it's necessarily imperative. This is not DK Metcalf or bust. And I think that in reality, it's probably not very likely the Ravens go out there and get DK Metcalf in the first place. I want to make that clear too. I don't think this is a likely thing that happens. I think the likely scenario that happens is they restructure Mark Andrews, they keep him on the roster for one more year, they let him walk after this next year. They then sign a veteran wide receiver who still has something left in the tank, but might not be their prime self, a la Hopkins, Diggs, Allen, Devontae Adams, whatever that conversation looks like. But we know that Lamar has had conversations with the Ravens front office and that he is a part of that. And so it's not like Lamar goes to the front office and says, hey, I want DK Metcalf, go get him. The Ravens go get him. That's not how that works. It is a joint effort. It's a group effort. I think it's great that the front office and the team involves Lamar in these decisions. Again, not to the point where Lamar is the GM and running the team and making signings, but to get his input on things because he is the franchise. He's the most important player on the team. So I think that getting his input on that is good. We know that he talked about during his contract situation, hey, I'd love to play with Odell Beckham Jr. I'd love to play with DeAndre Hopkins. Those would be great. The Ravens listened. They went out there and they signed Odell for Lamar Jackson. So whether this is, Lamar going to the front office and saying, I have these guys on a list here. I'd love to play with them. Maybe you could sign one. Let's see what happens. And if DK's on the list of, hey, if you can go out there and trade for this guy, maybe. But if the Ravens feel like that price is not worth it, if the money's too hard to make work, if they don't want to sign him to an extension, because I said this yesterday, I want to make it clear. If the Ravens trading for DK Metcalf means they can't re-sign Kyle Hamilton or they can't re-sign Tyler Linderbaum or Zay Flowers, I'm not making the deal. I'm only making the deal if you know that 3-4 years down the line, with that DK extension, because he's on a 1-year deal now, last year of his contract, if you can extend him for whatever it is, 3 years, push that money in 2025 down the line. If you can't re-sign a Hamilton or Linderbaum because of that, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. And to me, that's why I think that there are enough veteran receivers that have talent and are good. And even if you want to talk about name value, have that name value that the Ravens could bring in, and they really could make an impact without having to give up those guys. But look, DK, Zay, and Rashod all together, plus Isaiah Likely, if you trade Mark Andrews, sliding into that number 1 tight end spot. Yeah, that sounds pretty good to me. But then what happens with the other positions, that is where I think you have to look at. But hey, Lamar Jackson making it clear a couple of years ago that, hey, come on through DK. Well, maybe it actually happens this time around. Who knows? We're coming up in the second part of the show. There are a lot of guys who are getting released. Cap casualties and cap cuts, and the Ravens free agency wish list could be lengthened because of that. So we should have stayed tuned. We'll talk about a mortal enemy of the Ravens who could be coming to Baltimore. Stay tuned. Plan to talk about a Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get internet than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers are getting $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make everyone more. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. We are back. Our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Friday edition of the show, just a couple days away from NFL free agency. Baltimore has a lot of decisions they have to make, whether it be their own guys or guys they want to bring in. And we'll talk about the approach they should take with that in the final part of the show. But here, the free agency wish list for Baltimore continues to lengthen. Me personally, and I'm sure for the Ravens, seeing some of these guys get released and get cut, they're saying, hey, this guy wasn't available, but now that they are, maybe we'll kick the tires and see what happens. And we mentioned a lot of those guys on yesterday's show. And again, if you haven't checked that out, be sure to go check it out. But guys like Devontae Adams and Darius Slay, Joey Bosa is a big name. And again, these names continue to come in literally by the hour, even by the minute in some cases. So this is an ever-evolving situation. But one guy that I mentioned yesterday said I wanted to talk more about him on today's show. That's Gardner Minshew. And it brings up a bigger conversation about Baltimore's backup quarterback position in general. There have been multiple reports from different outlets that the Ravens could be looking for an upgrade at that backup quarterback slot. Josh Johnson's been that guy, at least he was last season. Before that, it was Tyler Huntley for a handful of seasons. And, before that, it was Robert Griffin III and Joe Flacco for Baltimore. And I think that as Lamar grew into his own, you didn't need to have that vet anymore. RG3 and Joe were good mentors for Lamar coming up. And then once Lamar didn't need that anymore, Tyler Huntley becomes the guy because he fits what you want to do. Then Tyler Huntley wanted other options. He ends up going to Cleveland of all places for some reason, ended up finding his way down to Miami. And then Josh Johnson ends up getting promoted to that. I could see Josh Johnson coming back potentially, but more so as the third emergency quarterback. I do think in terms of the actual backup to Lamar, an upgrade is probably warranted. And so when you talk about the backup quarterback position, obviously the best case scenario is that the backup never plays, or at least only plays in blowout situations. Hopefully those blowouts going in the Ravens' favor, my favorite phrase I used to call it was Tyler Huntley time or Josh Johnson time, because it means that the Ravens are up by 30, 35, whatever it is, and Lamar doesn't have to play anymore. So you get Lamar some rest and the other guy comes in. But my big conversation is, I know that everybody talks about Lamar getting injured and having to go to whoever it is. It's not going to be Lamar Jackson. And okay, the season's over, this, that, and the other. That's the case if Lamar is lost for the season at any point. If Lamar gets injured and, he has to miss the rest of the year, there are 2 games left, he has a 2-month injury and he's gone. But if Lamar gets injured in the first game of the season and he has to miss 2 months, right? 8 games, let's just say 8 games. If a bad backup quarterback is your option because maybe you cheaped out of the position, didn't want to pay the money, whatever it is, Lamar can come back after 2 months and still have an opportunity to lead the team to the playoffs, get the job done. He's fully healthy again. But if that backup quarterback goes 1-7 in those 8 games, 2-6, 0-8, a bad record, that puts the Ravens behind the 8 ball. Lamar has to do a lot more. They might even be out of contention at that point. It is good to have a backup option available, the insurance policy. And so the Raiders moved on from Gardner Minshew, reportedly, was told he's getting released by the team. Gardner Minshew, as we talked about, has been a thorn in the Ravens side, absolute thorn. And most recent examples of that, it was the Ravens losing to him as the Colts quarterback 2 years ago, and then last season losing to him as the Raiders quarterback. It's just Gardner Minshew against teams the Ravens should beat. He leads those teams to victories. I think Gardner is a really solid option for the Ravens. First of all, will not cost a compensatory pick. Ravens love that aspect of it, and if that is an aspect that they can take into account and he doesn't, that boosts him up maybe a little bit on the Ravens list. Plus, I think that he does fit in what the Ravens want to do there. He does have that mobility aspect to him. He has won games. He has that experience at the NFL level too. So it's not like bringing him in because Lamar needs a veteran. Lamar is a veteran. Lamar's going to be 30 years old in a couple of years. That is wild to think about. But regardless, Gardner's a guy that I think if Lamar were to go down, again, knock on wood, there it is, knock on wood, that does not happen. But if he were to, I think that Gardner could keep the Ravens afloat. That's what this is. Best case scenario, he never plays. But, you can't always have your best case scenario. The Ravens have had 2 years where Lamar's been lost for the season late. And, Tyler Huntley, credit to him, almost went into Cincinnati and beat the Bengals if it wasn't for Sam Hubbard, who actually retired. So I guess, no more Sam Hubbard in the NFL, Cincinnati, and obviously Lamar Jackson. Sam Hubbard was the victim on that incredible Isaiah Likely throw touchdown that happened. But regardless, it feels like while everybody's talking about offensive line and edge and DK Metcalf and all these other positions, I think the Ravens are going to allocate more money this year to the backup quarterback position. And even if it is Lamar can give advice to Gardner. Gardner can give advice to Lamar. This whole thing is an open quarterback room, not in terms of competition. Duh, it's Lamar's job. But I think that investing in a backup, at least a quality backup, would be good. I remember, when Baker Mayfield, he was an option as a backup. And then he went to Tampa, obviously did his thing, and now he's the franchise quarterback over there. But there were rumors that the Ravens were interested in signing Baker Mayfield to be the backup for Lamar Jackson. Now, obviously, shout out to Baker and having it all work out in Tampa would have been a vastly different career for Baker Mayfield, at least recently, had he actually had that and there was interest. But that's a position that a lot of people aren't talking about that I think people should be talking about. Now, it's not the position that's going to win or lose them a Super Bowl. In fact, if any backup quarterback has to go, not everybody can be Nick Foles and lead Philly to a Super Bowl like he did with the Eagles, and that can't be the story every single time. If Lamar goes down for the year, their season is done, and that just is what it is. But if Lamar has to go down and miss some time, not the rest of the season, if you're fighting for the North, if you're fighting for a wild card spot, fighting for the number 1 seed, you want to win as many games as you can. And, as Josh Johnson has had a very successful career in football, how many games would Josh Johnson have won the Ravens if Lamar went down for 2 months? I'm assuming maybe not a lot. So Gardner Minshew gives you a better chance to win those games. Another backup quarterback gives you a better chance to win those games. I'm fine, again, with Josh Johnson, number 3 quarterback, emergency guy. Totally cool with me. I don't think Devin Leary, to me, is the answer. I wasn't necessarily impressed with him in the preseason, and even in school was a little rough for him. But I think that, again, while backup quarterback's not your biggest need by a long shot, still something the Ravens could potentially look at. But coming up in the final part of the show, we'll talk about how the Ravens should approach this free agency, because there are a couple ways they could go with it, but I think they should do it a certain way. So be sure to stay tuned. I'll tell you what I mean next on Locked On Ravens. Back here on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher still here with you. Friday edition of the show. Really appreciate everybody for being here. Again, be sure to like and subscribe, video form and audio form, 4 or 5 days a week, plus more daily Ravens coverage. Every free agency has a different path for Baltimore. They always approach things a little differently, but always kind of fall in line with the same type of approach, which is they're not going to spend big in free agency early for the most part. Like to see the market develop. We've talked about that all here on the show before. But I think that this year, the Ravens should be more aggressive. I think if there was a year to be aggressive, this is the year. I think it's not pushing all your chips in terms of like the Rams a couple years ago when they moved off of tons of their first round picks for Matthew Stafford, Von Miller, etc. But I think that they should be aggressive in moving maybe some of their mid-round draft picks for guys, restructuring money, really aggressively pushing it down the line, really lowering these cap hits, extending guys. Because I think that this is the last year of this iteration of the Baltimore Ravens. Not with a lot of their stars, like Lamar Jackson's not going anywhere, and a lot of their other stars aren't going anywhere either. But if you talk about restructuring a Mark Andrews, you keep him on the roster with Isaiah Likely for one more season. This is the last year of that, because they cannot choose between Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. The option they cannot choose is both. They have to choose either Isaiah Likely or Mark Andrews, and I think the Ravens would be fools to not choose Isaiah Likely in that situation. I think you have to let Mark Andrews go. I think the Mark, again, as we've talked about, still a really, really, really good player, as is Isaiah Likely. If you want to utilize those two together, well, I think they should get aggressive in terms of maybe, does that mean DK Metcalf? I don't know, but maybe that is a veteran receiver they sign. They can go out there and make an impact, a real impact, not a Des Bryant, Sammy Watkins, Deshaun Jackson type signing. I think a Devontae Adams, that would be more of an aggressive move than maybe a Keenan Allen, right? You could see Keenan Allen also coming in and making an impact, and I think the Ravens will get one of those vets, but I think they should be aggressive. Maybe that's getting an edge in. Maybe that is signing a Joey Bosa, or maybe they make the big move for a Myles Garrett or a Micah Parsons. There are different levels of aggressiveness, and again, I don't think the Ravens, at least not as long as the guys that are in charge, and I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but I'm just saying the philosophy, they're not going to trade a bunch of first-round picks for guys. They're just not. That's not what they do. But a la Roquan Smith at the deadline a couple of years ago, could they make a move like that? That's something that they could do. Jair Alexander would be an aggressive move. And I'm not saying that they have to make one of those moves to be aggressive. That also could mean being aggressive in the draft. 11 draft picks is a lot of draft picks, and something that's made the Ravens so successful over the course of their career, or at least their franchise history, their franchise career, has been being able to take a lot of those swings, hit on those draft picks. You're going to miss some as well. They've missed a lot, as does every team, but they like to get as many swings as possible. Eric Costa has used that analogy before. Does that mean they need 11 draft picks this year? There's a guy that's falling to you. I think you should go up and make that move, even if that is maybe even trade a third-round pick next year or something along those lines. I think that you should do that because there's an opportunity with the Ravens not losing a lot of guys this offseason. They don't have that laundry list. We've talked about that. You can make one or two big additions, and it's not like you're replacing a certain guy on the roster. It's like, no, you are adding to this group. So I remember with Kyle Hamilton, for example, a lot of people had him going in their top 5, and he starts falling, and the Ravens are at 14, right around like pick 8 or 9. I started like squirming in my seat. I'm like, please trade up, please. And they got lucky. He fell to them at 14. They made that pick. It has worked out flawlessly ever since. There's a guy that falls to you. Let's just say Tyler Booker didn't have a great combine. He's a guard. Tyler Booker falls to you and is getting into that like 20 range, 21 range. I think the Ravens should make that move up if there's a talented player like that. So aggressiveness doesn't just mean in trades, doesn't just mean in free agency. There are other ways that they can be aggressive here. And again, I don't think that they should be the most aggressive they can. They shouldn't be ultra aggressive. But I would personally like it if they could take maybe a more aggressive approach than we've seen over the last handful of seasons. Maybe something more like the Marcus Williams, Morgan Moses, Zadarius Smith before it blew up in the Ravens' face and Zadarius' face, honestly, too. Maybe before that whole situation happened, those types of days, those types of moves, even Derrick Henry, I mean, that wasn't necessarily like aggressive in terms of the dollar amount or anything, but like going out there and signing one of the best running backs in the NFL is a somewhat aggressive move because they could have just ran it back with Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. They said, no, we're going to take a strength and we're going to improve that strength. And it worked out incredibly well for them. So I think that Eric DeCosta knows this. John Harbaugh knows this. Steve Bisciotti knows this. They have a window. And for as long as Lamar Jackson is at the peak of his powers or even playing at a high level, they will have a window. But with each year you don't get it done and the roster continues to shift, take shape, it's going to look different. But after this season, you're going to have to think about extension. You can even think about some of these extensions now, but like, again, Sadafe Owe and Kyle Hamilton and Zay Flowers and Tyler Linderbaum, and very down the line, it becomes Nate Wiggins and Roger Rosengarten, et cetera, et cetera. This is the year. This is the year. Not saying you can't do it any other year, but this is the year to me that they should go out there, get aggressive, make some moves that, aren't typical Ravens moves, but bring in a star from the outside. Other extensions have to happen too. What happens with Isaiah Likely and Travis Jones? Isaiah seems like a lock to get extended or just re-signed if an extension doesn't happen this year. This is the last year of his contract. But you have to start thinking about those types of moves because it's not going to be. The past couple of years, the Ravens have had those big free agent lists. This year, it's not that. Next year, they're going to have that again. They're going to have to make some tough decisions. This year, there aren't as many tough decisions. So instead of losing some guys and your roster talent going down and then you bring it back up, Ravens roster talent is not going to go down that much. Even if you lose everybody in the free agent class, you can make additions that make you a better team. And this is still a team that, in my opinion, is going to make noise in 2025. How much noise in 2025 is going to rely on a lot of different things, but you can put yourself in the best position to make that noise and go to the Super Bowl, win a Super Bowl. I think if you do become a little more aggressive than you are, or at least have been over the course of the franchise history of the team. So we'll see how it all plays out. And again, really exciting. Free agency is really exciting to me. And so we'll be back here on Locked On Ravens. If there's a big piece of Ravens news, we'll be back here live whenever it happens. And if not, then we'll be here on Monday and we'll be breaking down everything ahead of free agency starting. Monday is the day. So be sure on the way out, hit the like and subscribe button in video form, follow along and subscribe in audio form as well. I'll see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens.